The last speaker. The last speaker is Matěj Metelec. I will introduce him to you briefly. Matěj Metelec is an essayist, a publicist, an editor of a Cultural 2 weekly magazine where he publishes his texts, and he also publishes in Labyrinth, Nový Prostor magazines. Revue Prostor, Cinepor, or also on the web, A2 Alarm, where Martin's text was published. It was about a year and a half ago, I think. I think there were two texts. I will get to it. I can summarize this. I will use this as part of my short presentation here. There were two texts. One of them was at the time about a year after my second daughter was born, and the other text about 1 year later. It's about 3 years ago now, and they dealt with fatherhood and the role of a father who was on maternity leave, which was my case. And the 3 years are quite a long time. However, we probably have to start with the childbirth, because that's where the tasks start. Those tasks that are related to parenthood. And I think that to some extent, with the birth of each new child, every new child, these tasks recur, because biologically speaking, a person has a tendency to forget everything, which is a mechanism which is probably necessary for a person wanting to have more children than one. And that's... It's like these giant mountains whose peaks are hard to reach. Half of the parenthood usually stays somewhere at the bottom. Usually the mothers handle this. Fathers' roles usually end at the moment when the well-known saying postulates it. The tasks of men are build a house, father a son, plant a tree, that's all. And then later a man has nothing else to solve, or nothing else to do. However, the childcare in their early childhood is an experience both for men and women that cannot be substituted by anything else later. It's a period of time in life when, and I can say this on my own experience, that's when the relationships are built that can very hardly be established later in life. I've dealt with these things quite a lot in the two texts, and it may seem that it could be repeated here somehow, or summarize it here. When I thought about what I should say here, is that this cannot really be done. What I wrote about it, and I must say I have forgotten a lot already. As the children grow and the experience with them does not stop, it continues, and a change. We may have been an expert on something when a child was a year and a half years old, 1.5 years old. When somebody asks me today about problems and issues at that age, I can tell them, but when I look at my computer or the paper, I cannot really think back about what happened at that time anymore. So what I can talk about today will follow. Recently, about a month ago, I was addressed by a lady from TV that she wanted to do footage about men and paternal leave. I said that's great. I would love to help you. However, I'm not on the maternal or paternal leave anymore. She told me she would get back to me, and she has not. So I think that when I think the question is to what extent one can feel exceptional as a father after this period of time. It's called fatherhood in the era of capitalism. What is specific for fathers and fatherhood? What kind of troubles or concerns or worries do we have to address? What changes in time as children grow? Definitely, many things can be found. We have to find out whether there are some kindergartens, nurseries, whether it's paid for, or we have to cover the expenses ourselves. And also, the question of emancipation is clear. One of the brief speakers said, she's not here anymore, she mentioned the patriarchal emancipation model of the socialist state that really rested in the fact that there many things were introduced that in a way freed women and made the care for children easier. Children could go to nurseries or kindergartens, many things that have become a topic for many parents to solve, whether the children should go to nurseries or kindergartens.
Having a look at what I have lived and witnessed, the emancipation which we could see as for freeing of a woman from the care of children would have its true extent only when it's also supplemented by the care of the father, the model which only sort of supports the mothers through the institutions is not sufficient, and it also has an important moment that it's not only to correct certain issues within the gender and national gender approach, but there is also another level of correcting relations among the parents and children in the mutual relationship. I'm convinced what is quite frequently forgotten or omitted is the depth or multidimensional size of this economic issue or question. And that is what has been mentioned here. Also, work, caregiving, work at home, unpaid work, what is being developed, what we see, or what we witness at the level of work, caregiving, are dimensions and roles of particularly of women, but when sharing the care, it's not clear and obvious what is meant by the category. I'm of the opinion that these so-called unpaid work or the care as such has slightly different dimension and quality, and that we only try to define it as a pure work if we are heading towards human emancipation that actually limits these possibilities, because it's a category which overlaps the biological level and the term of work as a concept of work as we perceive it from Karl Marx or Adam Smith, but it also the concept of work having on mind automation and new sectors of the science, art, as something what should replace the secondary sector is being redefined to a certain extent. I think what is connected to the concept of work, typical concept of work, which we transfer into the field of caregiving as we define it as work on reproduction, is a certain necessity or fighting for the bread. And there are no clear limits to what within the caregiving has exactly the same scope, which is the joy, play. The reason why the conceptualization is we witness, it's based on the clear gender distinction of the roles. In the first presentation, it was mentioned as caregiving and household works were primarily done by women or considered as the task of the women. So it became a moment of a battle for emancipation. Nevertheless, to be able to valorize what the value of work has not been accepted. So it had to be put at the same level with the work in the factory, which, as a matter of course, has a clear baseline or roots in the given period. It's quite a paradox that currently the post-industrialist capitalism and the self-management and the then state socialism do meet at this particular point. The concentration on the dehumanization of relationships is actually equal. When I was pondering and considering it, the alienation, the concept of alienation during the 60s, when people were discovering, when she was discovering Freud and Marx, is it's very interesting, stimulating and inspiring for the current period, because this alienation penetrates also into other fields of activity where economic production actually meets with biological and with the cultural, social reproduction of certain behavioral patterns, building up a career, and on the other hand, the economic and social level, the effort to fight for life. that actually narrows the possibilities for the parenthoods. The model of society and factory as such in during the state socialism, where there was need to achieve a certain models. Everything was based on the work, and on the other hand, the current capitalistic approach, human being as a capital which has to be catered for, and the discourse and discussions which really try to be emancipation, like, for example, the feministic. They have overtaken the vocabulary and they accepted the approach or the point of view at the issues which should actually be taken away or separated from the work field, and we should have different or use different concepts, different terms for it, be it in the socialist or the capitalist meaning of the word. If we have a look at the effort to somehow balance it, there were many concepts which tried to find a way around Lafargue, the right to laziness. Lafargue was the son-in-law of the Marx. It's a book, no one is quite sure to what extent it's supposed to be a joke, prank, or to what extent it's meant serious. Or Bolt Blanc has tried to define the word post-work, or maybe quite surprisingly, I'm not sure, in the feminist discourse or emancipation discourse, which focused on reproduction of work or the tasks at the household as a work. This has not been stressed, actually. The different way of thinking about the work, trying to go away from the concept of performance output. Well, I have to speed up a little bit what the career means, which I mentioned briefly. Who has the career, who is entitled to have a career, how the moment of performance and output meets here, that out of sudden we have well-positioned or better-positioned people who are striving for the career, and then the others who only strive for the life. These models at completely different poles of a social ladder limit the parenthood, limit the efforts to carry out properly the parenthood. It's quite devastating moment and with devastating impacts on the human potential. And again, within the emancipational discourses, they were trying to cope with it. Maybe we miss again the concept, terminology, and terms. Maybe it's much better. When I was writing the article, I just recalled in Cavani's book, there were the titles of good mothers awarded, and based on the grotesque, you can find ways how to approach the valorization of parenthood. But state socialism and the current capitalism both are pushing it to pushing it somewhere where you can't grasp it from the terminology point of view, from the conceptual point of view, where you have to look for the values or how it can be perceived also by the others. And as a matter of fact, the only possibility how to evaluate ourselves within the parenthood role and the caregiving is so privatized that it actually forces you to follow the New Age concepts and within these to look and find your own ways where you can meet the other parents. But in case you do not want to accept it, then you have no chance to find a proper support or supportive structure concerning the value where you can add to where you can add the value, or at least it's very, very difficult on my own behalf, thanks to Mama Tata and how it works. It really is possible to find it, and you can participate on it, and probably that's my end of my presentation.
Dobře. Tak, děkuji moc Matějovi Metelcovi za příspěvek.
I would like to extend my thanks to Matěj Metelec. You know, I thought we have plenty of time. Unfortunately, we have just 7 minutes available, so we can also have a break prior to the second panel. Now, you have the unique opportunity to ask questions to Matěj Metelec.
Pokud máte, tak mě můžu nějakou otázkou vykopnout. Asi budu muset, že jo. Ty jsi to vlastně na konci nakous. To byl
At the very end, you have mentioned it. You were actually trying to criticize how nothing works, and at the end, you have mentioned you try to solve it through a shared parenthood, mama, tata, or within a group of people where you try to share the role. Is there any possibility from the leftist intellectual to rely on the state? Silvia Federici actually requested a wage for the household work, which you actually criticized. What the relationship should look like? What the relationship should look like between the state and you? Well, it's one of the issues or things I really had to limit or narrow significantly because of the time given to me. It's can be nicely illustrated on a period of when the work at the home or at the household, it was carried out during the bourgeois period by someone who was paid for it, because that's actually the work which should be paid for, or someone who is carrying it should be paid for. It really worked not only within the capitalism, but also in the ex-Soviet Union, those who were building hard socialism back in the 30s. They had servants paid for doing the work at home, and it was very legitimate because they were delivering a hard work on building the socialist society. So they could use other comrades less qualified for washing the dishes, for example. So it very much depends how we will grasp it. If we will have at the same level the caring for children and washing the dishes. If we consider this to be at the same level, it would be it would be very difficult to cope with it, because those of us who have the children, who are bringing up the children, we can't consider it as a work at the same level. In case we would have robots, we would definitely use them for such a lower level of work. During the social period, when you will not necessarily have to cater for ironing, because you will have an ironing in your house, collective house. There were projects within the houses. There was just one kitchen shared, ironing room shared. There was no need to have separate rooms for children. They could share toys and everything with others in the share rooms. But it did not work. It did not function. If work at household should be paid for, well, it should be at least remunerated by some basic sort of wage, basic income. Do you think that the discussions in the 70s, which Federici actually launched through wages for housework, that actually had a negative impact on the discussions held? Well, we may say that it harmed or made wrong to the discussions. It has negative impact, but